of Open Forum. Welcome to the Spanglish Sports World Network on Zingo TV channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are perfectly free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on Open Forum. Joining me is the Honorable MPP Michael Coteau of and let me say this first, sir. Welcome to the program, and you've been around for a little while. We've done this show a little bit. You've been the most experienced politician we've had on, so I'm looking for some very good answers and a real understanding of what happens in politics.
Well, it's funny you say that because I arrived at the legislature 10 years ago, and I was in my late 30s, and I think the average age was around 60 at the legislature. And, Michael Gravel and Kathleen Wynne, if they decide not to run again, and I'm successful in the next election, that would make me the most senior Liberal in all of Ontario at the legislature, which is pretty incredible if you think about it.
Is that your way of saying you're throwing your hat into the ring, or does the leader have any concerns?
In regards to no, not at all. That would make me the most the longest serving Liberal or anyone at the legislature is Jim Bradley. 41 years
Right.
He served. So I was speaking to Jim Bradley last year, and I said, Jim, if we know Kathleen Wynne's not running again. If Michael runs, he runs. If he doesn't, but besides Michael Gravel, I said to Jim that I would be the longest serving Liberal in the Ontario legislature. So I'd be kind of the new Jim Bradley. And I think he got a kick out of that because there's no one who can, we can compare to that 41 years. He was definitely the dean of the legislature.
What would people say in Don Valley East if I asked them, so what do you think of this guy that runs your riding? What do you think of Michael Coteau?
I think most people would make reference to the fact that I was a school board trustee for 8 years, that I grew up in the community, that our office is always here to help people. Anyone can walk through our doors pre-COVID. We took appointments with everyone. And, there are a lot of MPPs right now that don't make themselves accessible to their constituents. We've never had that policy. We've had a complete open door policy. So we're accessible. We're here to help. And even if we disagree with you, which sometimes happens, we understand that our job is to help you navigate and to advocate on your behalf. And so we don't hold judgment at the door when people come through with issues.
It's very difficult to focus in on any issue. But if there are issues that you consider a priority, without putting you on the spot, how would you list the priorities for yourself? Knowing that you care about autism, knowing that you care about education, I don't mean to answer for you, but I just want to make sure that we understand that we're just talking about the priorities at the top of your head right now.
So my number one priority always, since for almost 20 years now, is to make Ontario the best place in the world to raise a child. That's been a priority for me because, when I think about kids these days and the challenges they're going through, man, it's tough. They're not getting enough sleep. A lot of kids are not eating properly. They're on the average Ontario kids pre-COVID was on a computer or a digital screen 5 hours a day. There's mental health issues that have doubled in the last 2.5 years. I assume that COVID is going to increase that even more. So for me, it's always been about kids. It's about, and when you have a society, because people will say, well, what about seniors, Michael? What about, families? What about, single parents? And I always say this, that if you make a world that's perfect for kids, the perfect world for children, everything else falls into place. You have better doctors, you have better infrastructure, that making a park from the perspective of a child, but not forgetting the grandparent, makes it accessible, and it just makes a better family. So for me, it's always been about kids, making sure that kids have the right to play. And that's why I'm going to show you something. This is the only political cartoon that has ever been done on me. Can you see it? Now, the reason I'm showing you this, it's because we have about 70 municipalities in Ontario right now where kids are not allowed to play road hockey. Could you imagine that? So I've been to towns where I've actually brought mayors hockey sticks. I've put in place, when I was the Minister of Children and Youth Services, I wrote to City Hall in Toronto and asked them, the councillors, to reconsider their position. You know, I believe that adults get in the way of kids too often in this this world we're in, and we make life complicated. You know, kids not being allowed to toboggan in certain areas. Kids, remember those kids in Ottawa? They got tickets for selling lemonade by the bylaw officers, or the guy downtown Toronto who had a tree house that the neighbors wanted to rip it down. Like, you know, get out of the way and let kids be kids. You know, don't bring them into our complicated world. Let them be children. And that's what I've been fighting for from the very beginning.
I don't want to make this sound like I'm tossing softballs at you. That's why one of the things that you're concerned about, I guess, is autism. At the end of the day, a healthy child is a healthy family. I know, you know, it's like that. You know, it's like that saying that when you're sitting in the airplane and the stewardess says, "Put your mask on first, and then take care of the child." In this case, it's the reverse, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, obviously you've got to make sure that people have good jobs so kids can, you know, can eat and, you know, access opportunity. But I think if you know, the reason they set up the Ministry of Children and Youth Services when McGuinty set it up was to filter every single policy that was coming forward from every single ministry from the perspective of a child. How would this impact a child? What would be the, you know, the benefits? And I think we've lost that in government today. You know, if we actually filtered policy and said, well, you know, we are going to just at least ask one question. How is this going to impact children? That one question will change policy always. So I think that yeah, that's been my motivation. That's what, you know, that's why I got into this, and it's what continues to motivate me. And that's why, you know, when I took over the autism file, it was important for me to make sure that, you know, kids got what they need in order to reach their full potential.
Yeah, I probably didn't make my point well enough. In the case of the airplane and the child and the parent, it's a matter of what you do in an emergency. But
Right.
What you're referring to is when you're not in an emergency situation, you're in an emergence situation. And how do children
Right.
emerge from their childhood, and to what benefit can they be to society if they're given the opportunity to be the best they can be? I think that's what I'm hearing from you.
Right, absolutely.
So you talk to us about autism, because that's a subject that gets pretty intense on a political level. There have been really serious debates over the past few years about autism and how it should be handled and how the government should interact with the parents of autistic children.
Right. You know, I had a mother come and see me back maybe in 2007, 2008, when I was a school board trustee. And she asked me for help, and the system was pushing her away constantly. And I helped her as much as I possibly could. And, you know, Dr. Chris Spence, the former director of education at the Toronto District School Board, met with her, and they actually put in a plan that worked. The ABA training was provided, which was an outlier. They never did that in education before, provide the ABA training. And, you know, she was so grateful to me. And it was interesting, when I was appointed minister responsible for that specific file, you know, I called her back and I said, you know, you thought I was helping you, but all you were doing was getting me ready for this file, because I knew, you know, the issues, right? And, you know, these parents, they've gone through, you would not believe what these folks have gone through. Could you imagine having a kid? And I want you, do you have any children?
Yes.
So you're a parent, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Imagine having a kid, and you know the separation between them doing well in life, or at least being their best comes down to a certain amount of money and not being able to generate that money because it could cost 60, 70, 80 grand a year. Imagine that. Imagine how it would make you feel if, right now, the Ford government, for example, is giving out $5,000 if you're over 7. The ABA training and therapy and what they need in some cases where it's complex is $80,000 a year. So these families who are hardworking families are, mortgaging their homes. They're doing everything they can. And as a parent, you do anything for your child. Could you imagine being in that situation? And that's the kind of frustration that, parents are feeling today. With my program that we put in place, we had 20,000 kids on the wait list, and that's still unacceptable. Today, that list has grown to 46,000. And, the government says, well, everyone's getting some money now, but it would be the equivalent of me saying, kids are going to go to school for 2 hours a day, not 2 hours a week. And then I would say, well, that's not enough. And I would say, well, all kids are in school because they're going for 2 hours a week. That's exactly what's happening with the autism file today. Yes, they're getting some money, but it's nowhere near what they actually should be getting to get them to reach the best possible place and prepare them for life.
How do you balance, the effectiveness of the program and the cost? I guess I hate using this word, but justifying the cost. How do you end up making it work? Like, it's great that you throw money at a problem, but
right.
You kind of hope that money is maximized as far as efficiency is concerned.
When you spend, let's just say you have a child who really needs some intense therapy, 35 hours a week. You do that for 2-3 years. It's not something that should be going on forever. It's putting in place the skill sets that are aligned with their capacity level to better navigate. So, for example, you have kids coming into the program who are nonverbal. These kids can't talk, can't use the washroom, can't feed themselves. You take care of those 3 pieces, over a 2-year, $160,000 investment. I can guarantee you that the long-term society will be saving millions of dollars. It's the same argument we use in education. It's the same even in like rehabilitation, when people go into correctional facilities. It's the same argument we make around keeping people healthy and staying in their homes so they don't come into the healthcare system and they end up costing $1,700 a day sitting in a hospital bed. It's about preventative measures and it's preparing young people, but not to compare those kids to, senior or the education system or, corrections. But I'm saying it's the same type of approach. If you think long-term, if you look at the big picture when it comes to politics, usually there's an alternative to a short-sighted, often, and it's not all conservatives because there's some really good progressive conservatives out there, but just making those snap decisions based on that day doesn't really speak to where we need to be long-term as a society.
Maybe teaching somebody to fish is better than just paying for the food, right? So
you're perfect with the analogies.
Thank you. It's my strength. That's why they call me Candid Frank. So we're talking about children now. Let's stay on that theme. We're talking about cost. I called you to task because can you just throw money at a problem? Another one of those things that you might be offering is free transit for children. Please speak to us. Unpack that for us, would you?
Well, I obviously, and not to get I don't want to be too partisan, but I'm in the opposition. I criticize the Ford government constantly. I criticize the Ford government, but I did say that to the Minister of Transportation that making GO transit free for kids was a great idea. And I actually said that, there are a few things they actually did right, and that was one of them. The Ford government did do that. Now, mind you, not many kids use GO during the week. So maybe it's some weekend use, and it's a small amount of money that will be lost, but it does encourage adults to start using the system more with their children and can actually strengthen ridership. I think that, do you know how much it costs for a kid to go to school and back every day for a pass? You have any clue?
I did 10 years ago. Yeah,
Can you remember what it
I think
was 10 years ago?
it was a lot. It was a lot of money. But my kids, fortunately for us, my wife didn't work. Well, she did.
Right.
Got to be careful when you say that stuff. She was
Yeah, yeah, I know
a
what you mean.
working mom, right? So basically, she drove the kids to school, and when I had time, I would drive the kids to school. So we didn't. We were only blocks away from the school, so we were fortunate in that regard. But I do understand that there are a lot of people whose children travel a long distance.
It's like it's like a hundred, and I think it's around $120 a month. Imagine you have two kids.
Yeah,
Imagine you're a single parent. Like, to me, that is unbelievable. So you know what it does? If you're going to spend, let's just say $250 a month, $2,500 over a 10-month period for passes, you're going to start to say, well, wait a minute, maybe I should just maybe I should lease a small little car like a Civic, for $200 a month. And then it starts adding more, there's an environmental issue that, there's more traffic around the school. So when taking the bus catches up to leasing a car, that's problematic.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the same debate with minimum wage, right? There are a lot of times when our costs, this. Okay, I'm going to be blunt. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. By definition, whatever the squeaky wheel is in people's minds, I'm not here to tell anybody what it is, but at the end of the day, those that have the attention of the people that make the right decisions, that's why you get elected, because you've got to bring to the attention of the voting public sometimes stuff, I guess, stuff that people don't want to hear but they need to hear. That's the balance with children, right? Because the stuff that you have to do, on its face, people think costs, but they don't understand the benefit. And you've tried, and I respect the fact that you tried to highlight the benefit. The benefit for families, when it comes to education, education can be expensive as well. There now is, this move to help pay for people's education. I understand about debt. I understand about picking up people's debt. But what do you say to the people who paid off that debt? The dad that took the extra job, the mom that went to work, back to work, and they paid off the debt. How do you justify in their minds that, paying someone's debt, whatever amount it is, whether it's part up to a certain amount or all of it, regardless? Your comment, please.
Well, I think that's a great question, because I owed $56,000 when I finished university. That frightened me. I was afraid of even opening up the envelopes when they came to my house. I looked at them. I didn't know how I was ever going to pay that money off in my mind. Coming right out of school, that was a lot of money. I eventually paid it off. I think we've hit a place globally where if we don't come to the realization that maximizing the full potential of Ontarians as a region by making sure that we have the best, most diverse, educated workforce that has the ability to switch when trends change, if we don't come to a realization that that person, again, reaching their full potential, if it's trade, if it's post-secondary, if it's, college, university, if it's post-grad, if that person can actually reach their potential, it positions Ontario overall in a more strategic position to take on, the future economy. So I'll give you a perfect example. And I'm going to go to the complete opposite. Do you know in the Jane and Finch community today, we spend $80 million policing and incarcerating people from that neighborhood? Do you know how much we spend in Rosedale for policing and incarcerating? Little peanuts, not much money, right? And for obvious reasons, poverty, there's usually a connection to crime and to things like that. People are right next to each other, and this is challenging. But my point is this: we invest such little money as a society into cultivating communities by providing, after school programs, summer opportunities, putting forward incentives to stay in school and then, to go off to post-secondary. One of the first things Doug Ford did was when he came into government, and I don't know if you know this, he got rid of the after-school program fund, community use of schools, in the poorest neighborhoods in the city. He took, I think it was like $40 million, and the same month he took that money and put it into the guns and gangs task force. So it was like it's like we're almost cultivating outcomes. What outcome do you want? Do you want a society where we're spending $80 million in one specific neighborhood? And it's not just Jane and Finch, Lawrence Heights, other places like that. Do we want to take that money and slowly start transforming it to invest at the beginning of one's life so that the outcomes are different? It generates more taxation dollars, more revenue, and it allows for us to build more infrastructure. In the United States alone, there's billions of dollars lost every single year because of systemic racism, because of systemic issues. Like, we need to figure out how we get people to reach their potential and mitigate the cost that is a result of the outcome versus investing up front and changing that negative outcome. So, that's been my approach in politics. And I think it's a forward-looking way that you can use to address many issues in Ontario today, including infrastructure, healthcare, etc.
Teachers, well, first I'll address what you said there. There is the theory that a hammer in its existence sees everything as a nail. So if you send in lots of police into a community, they're going to see people. If they're the hammer, they're going to see a lot of nails. Now, if you send in a hammer that is socially attuned to the idiosyncrasies and or the nuances of a neighborhood, whether it be what you're talking about is that if you give an opportunity for people to just be people as opposed to numbers, maybe the upside becomes that those young children that see this kind of interaction grow up to believe that interaction doesn't exist, and they can find a better interaction with the community leaders and the people who reach out into their community.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There's an old saying that if a police car follows you for an hour or two, eventually they're going to find an infraction, right? You're going to do something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to it. And you go into some of these neighborhoods, like I grew up in Flemington Park, lots of, challenges, social issues around youth violence and, just problems for kids. But I'm telling you, you go into some of these neighborhoods today, there are no programs for kids. The kids don't have things to do. You go into, and I'm not talking there may be the odd, basketball net, people will come and cut a ribbon because they put up a basketball net. I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about making sure that there's entry points into the trades. I'm making sure that there's, academic courses available at the local school that can push you into the, the changing economy and the economy of the future. Coding programs, aligning what kids are interested in to what's actually being offered. You go into what's the area? The Dixon area. Is it called Dixon? The community. I went out there, met with large Somali population, huge death rates of these kids. It's horrible. And there's one school, elementary school, that has actual space for programs. And here's the crazy thing: they offer the program, and anyone from the city can actually register. So parents, when their computers register into those classes, and the kids locally don't have access to them. And there's a disalignment between the programs being offered and what the kids would actually be interested in. It's those types of things that we as a society need to change, and to make sure that that space is allocated to the kids in the area, and there's money being invested to keep them busy, keep them engaged, and get them to, to become the next, scientist, the next teacher, the next lawyer. They don't have to be, kind of pushed into a predetermined pathway that ends up, in many cases, negative.
I guess what you're saying, I can afford to say this because I'm the host and I'm the person making inquiries. Are you suggesting that we should eliminate systemic stupidity?
Well,
Is that what you're suggesting?
well, this is why people are so fed up with politicians. It's politicians. No, let's be honest. There's not many people that like politicians these days. They think they're crooks. They think they're uh, the decisions they make are based on their self-interest. Um, they lack vision and insight and ideas, and they don't really understand what people are going through. I have a suggestion for you. Next time you bring in a politician, ask them a simple question like, how much does a bag of milk cost? How much does a loaf of bread cost? What does it cost to take the TTC today? You do that, you'll get some really big surprises. They might hate you for it, but you'll be surprised, that people can't even answer these simple questions that people every single day deal with.
So how much does a bag of milk cost?
$4.27.
Depends where you buy it.
My father's blind. He's 82 years old, so I do all his grocery shopping, and I do our grocery shopping. So I know all the prices. I know the prices. That's
yeah. I think the unfortunately, when it comes to politicians, perception is reality.
Right.
And politicians are their own worst enemy, in my opinion. And now I don't want to be one of those interviewers that is out there throwing out their opinion.
Right.
But what I will say to this extent, that politicians have forgotten how to coalesce. You're a big proponent of coalitions, and without the coalitions, you have the opposite, which is, and that doesn't get us anywhere. Why is it politicians today find it so easy? And I'm generalizing here, so I apologize for generalizing, but why does it seem like politicians, it's easier to go to the argument than it is to go to the agreement?
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that, because you take Twitter, for example, you throw something up negative, you'll get like 3 times more likes. You throw something up positive, you get less likes, and it's it's just it seems to be normal these days. But I think that to answer your question, people are pursuing, like, it's the pursuit of power, right? This is what people are pursuing in politics.
At its worst.
Well, even if you're a good person and you're not there for the power to, for personal reasons, you're there for the power so you can actually implement the ideas you want, especially with a majority government, right? You want to form a majority so you can get your agenda accomplished. So even the very nature, it's very different. I was kind of, I was brought up at the school board level, so you could not avoid being collaborative. You had to hold a certain amount of decorum, because you and me may disagree today, but the next council meeting or the next trustee meeting, I need your support. So you can't just, the lines are not drawn like in provincial politics. So I grew up in that environment. So when I see guys like Chris Glover, who's an NDPer, who was on the school board with me, automatically in my head, I just think we're colleagues, like in that same sense. I tried to build those relationships across the floor with other people, regardless of their political party. I'm always looking for ways to collaborate with people, but the partisanship, and we're all guilty of it, including myself, is overwhelming, because you go in there and you get and you have an agenda, and you have a majority government, and you really want to push through your agenda because this is what you believe in. And so sometimes, you've got a 4-year cycle, which is a big problem in politics, because that 4 years gives you a short timeline to get things done. And eventually it just starts going like this, conservative, liberal, and the policy just goes back and forth. What we need is a way to look at Ontario for the next 50 years, to get political parties to agree on some basic fundamentals like infrastructure renewal. What are our schools going to look like 10 years from now, 50 years from now? Let's make that commitment to actually agree on that, and stop changing our transit plans. Stop canceling highways. Let's get the decisions right now and lay in that plan, because I'll tell you, the Japanese do this, the long-term infrastructure vision, and it gives them the ability. Many countries do this long-term planning. Ontario, we haven't been successful in that.
the competition that is the real competition, I guess, isn't in the legislature or in parliament. The real competition is in the world, because the world is such a small place right now. It's so competitive. We live in a world today where it's there, it isn't strictly have and have not. There's it's a rainbow of different circumstances, situations that all the countries in the world have. It's not as cut and dried as it used to be, which I guess, in your words, enhances the competition, if I'm garnering a little bit of an understanding of what you're saying.
That came to a realization for me. I went to this North American, all the different representatives at the state level, provincial level. They have this annual conference, and I went to, I think it was Chicago. Was it Chicago, Pittsburgh? And I was there at the table with the Ontario MPPs. So there's NDPers, there's Conservatives, and then there's me as a Liberal. And we're in a room with 2,000-3,000 people. And, I said something like to the guys, at the table, to the folks at the table, I said, the competition is not us, it's the folks around us. Because make no mistake, those jurisdictions would just take us out if they could economically to benefit their local state, because that's their job. They want to create opportunity economically for their folks, right? So if they can take an industry from Ontario and bring it to their state, they have no problem doing that. And so here we are in Ontario, fighting each other and calling each other, all these different things, accusing each other. But at the same time, there's literally thousands of politicians out there at the state, provincial level that are looking to take business from Ontario, because Ontario does well. If you look at North America, Ontario is one of the most fruitful jurisdictions in North America, without a question. There's a lot of business here that people would like to take from us, and we need to find some common ground to lock in not only present industry, but what that future industry, and actually hedge on a few things. Let's bet on something, or a few things as Ontarians.
Yeah, unfortunately, some people think of it as some people use the excuse of trying to build a better mousetrap, when in fact what they're doing is breaking the mousetrap.
Right.
It's a tough thing to deal with as a politician, and I, as a person who really cares about the political process and the way politicians are looked at, the way our police are looked at. You touched on some subjects that are near and dear to my heart. I grew up at Allen Road and Lawrence, so
Okay.
we had a community there that changed. We referred to it back in the day. We referred to it as the jungle, but it wasn't because of what people think. It was worse than that. It was people. It wasn't a place of people of color. It was treating another segment of society that didn't have money, that needed help, that was treated much like what we talk about with systemic racism and all that kind of stuff. The point I'm trying to make is, how do you bring everybody along? Because racism and disadvantage isn't just a thing of color. Sometimes I think it's being hijacked, the need for everybody. In other words, when you go police everybody. Don't look for somebody in particular to police. Look at crime as a level playing field. We spend too much time trying to undo what we think is the problem. What can we do for you as a politician? I feel I can talk to you about this. The fear that sometimes political correctness, the fear sometimes of cancel culture, all these things that are creating problems. Again, remember what I said about perception. That's what my question's enveloped in. It's about perception. There are a lot of people outside of your community, outside of my community, who don't live in racially diverse communities, who look at us and all they glean from what's going on is, oh, look, they want to show favoritism to them, to her, to that, to this, and they don't really care about me. Do you have any concerns, and how do you address people outside of those communities who are looking in and wondering if you're taking away their life? As you know, I know you're aware of that, and that's one of the challenges you have as a politician.
Well, a few years ago, I went right across the province and literally spoke to 10,000 plus people about racism, from Thunder Bay,
Aurelia.
Everywhere you could imagine, we just went out and we spoke to people. And the first thing, even you, Frank, right now, asking that question, I can tell you were a little bit uncomfortable. You know why you felt a little uncomfortable? Because race is a difficult thing to talk about. Racism is a thing to, like, you weren't brought up to talk about religion, probably race and money, right? It was pretty
No,
normal.
actually, you're wrong.
Huh?
I hate that. This is the point I'm trying to make. I was a child and I was hit with a nightstick of a police officer. I was
Right.
assaulted by a cop when I was less than 10 years old.
That's crazy.
My father was arrested, all right, and they tried to convict him of assaulting a police officer, and the only reason he got off is because he worked for a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant company called the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. If he hadn't been working at that yacht club, they would have taken him and they would have put him in jail. I'm of Italian origin. Trust me when I say this.
Yeah.
We understand, Italians my age understand racism. We understand
how
it works.
How could you understand, Frank, if you're not racialized?
Well, I'll tell you right now, you could be both, right? They're not.
Yeah, but when I look at you, you're a white guy. You're a European white guy.
Absolutely.
So how do you understand? I'm really being sincere. How do you understand racism?
Well, I do understand as an 8-year-old being confronted by the police. I'm not acquiring your pain or people of color's pain. I'm establishing that I have pain as well. And
Absolutely.
It came from the same place where it's coming today for other people.
You were discriminated against. Your father was discriminated against.
And you know what happens when you're discriminated against? You know, it comments like this. I'll give you an example. I'm not acquiring your pain or anyone else's pain. This is my pain. I was in a relationship and I was engaged. My future father-in-law said, and I quote, "He's not one of those Italians." Does that sound familiar to you? Sound familiar to you?
That's pretty tough. You know, in Toronto, the Italian guys, and I used to sit next to a couple of guys, MPPs, in the legislature. You know, guys like Mike Cole. Like pretty interesting guys, like, who would tell me like what they would reflect on what it was like a generation before them. Absolutely. And it was just incredible because, I would hear these stories about, the Italian community back in the old days. Even Laura Albanese used to tell me some of these stories that she would hear from other people in the community. And I'd talk to people about it. But there was a time in Toronto where the Italian guys were told, not to hang out at the corner of the street, which back home would be a regular thing they would do. Like, hang out the corner, talk to each other. The police would come in and, beat the crap out of these guys, and it was a regular thing. So there's many communities that have gone through different forms of racism,
almost every
discrimination and hate. And it happens in stages, right? It's all the new guys that come in, it happens to. But I'll tell you this, racism is a very difficult thing for people to talk about in Ontario. And we as Ontarians need to talk about it and make it comfortable for people to talk about it, regardless of who you are, white, Black, Indigenous, it doesn't matter. Because racism, and I said this at the Economic Club of Canada, the speech I gave, I said there's a cost to standing still. There's an economic cost, moral imperative without a question, but there is an economic imperative at play here. If we don't figure this stuff out, it's going to hurt you and it's going to hurt others. And because that kid in the Jane and Finch community is not reaching their full potential, it takes away our competitiveness as a jurisdiction. And, you can't just keep relying on, immigration in order to build the economy. We have to focus on, simultaneously on people here and get them into opportunities so they can actually go out there and make some money. And you know what? Buy a house, put money down for a car, go on a vacation once in a while. That's how you build a strong community. And we're missing that in many areas. You can't even buy a house in this city anymore. You could work 2 jobs and not buy a house. It's crazy, right?
That's why I don't live there anymore. I live in Simcoe. So,
Simcoe, fastest growing region, I think, in Ontario.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I hope I'll be able to afford to live here for a little longer. No, hey, listen, don't misunderstand my passion about this.
No, I got you clearly.
What it's all about is this. It's about racism is something that's been going on forever. The United States was built on the Irish people, right? Because they were discriminated against and as Catholics. I can tell you, I got married in a church in Peel, all right, that was Catholic, and the community would not let it be built for 20 years. All right. So I know these are, we can talk about this later because I don't want to embarrass you.
No.
I can tell you the name of the church later. And you can look into it yourself. My point is, I get the fact that racism is an issue. But for me, my problem isn't racism. It's about human rights and rule of law. And I think everybody has human rights, and everybody should work under the under rule of law. So once we start partitioning, people and saying, pointing out the differences. Remember that hammer and nail analogy that I used? That's the problem with. Don't you think as a society we have to be more inclusive as opposed to diversifying people and identifying our differences and more identifying what's similar to us? My friends are my friends because they're my friends, not because of where they were born, what they look like. If you're going to be my friend, you're going to be my friend because of that Martin Luther King content of character.
Right.
That should be the priority. I
think in the purest form, like, what you're saying, obviously, in its pure form is great. Like, we shouldn't separate ourselves. We're in this together. Let's figure out how we grow as an Ontario. It sounds great. But the reality is that if you're a Black person in Ontario, chances are, you're going to be pulled over more. Chances are, imagine this statistic. If you're a university graduate, a Black university male, there's still a 23% unemployment rate. These are numbers from a few years ago. If you're a white high school dropout, it's like 11 or 12%. The harsh reality is, we're all, we can all stick together and work hard, but the impact of systemic racism is very different, and it impacts different communities in many different ways. Home ownership. So this is an interesting point. So home ownership, and again, these statistics are almost 10 years old. If you're Indigenous, I think it's a 16% chance you own your home. If you're Black, it's like 34%. If you're white, it's like 64%. If you're Asian, it's like almost 80%. So that doesn't mean, to me, like, you can dissect it a couple of ways and say, the Asian folks must be working really hard to do that. But there's some systemic pieces at play, that make it more difficult for people. Do you know the longer Black people children stay in this country, every generation, the educational outcomes get lowered? Did you know this?
That's horrible. Then what do we do about it?
Yeah, Carl do about it? Well, this is the whole point. So once we actually figure out, they say no data, no problem. Once we figure out the data and we actually start to collect the information and we understand that, Black males are doing well in this area, but they're not doing well in this area compared to the bigger, larger group. Well, what's the reason for it? Why is that happening? Once we start to dissect it, we can actually, focus in on the problem and start to make, the solution. So separation is good for research purposes in order to identify the issue and then, figure out where the problem is to fix it. So I've been a big proponent of data collection from my time at the Toronto District School Board collects race-based data. That was because of a motion I put in, with a guy named Bruce Davis. The same way we set up the Anti-Racism Directorate, to understand the impact of, for example, healthcare. Do you know some communities are more prone to, for example, prostate cancer? Black males are very prone to prostate cancer. It impacts them at different ages and compared to the general public. Well, if we know this, what can we do to find out what the causes are, to mitigate those causes, put in preventative measures. And you know what happens at the end, Frank? We save money. And that's a pretty cool thing. And people are healthier. So the moral imperative is always what I'm striving for, but I also like the economic piece. See how we've kind of wrapped this conversation back to the beginning point. So it's an interesting issue, I think.
The moral imperative, I understand where you're coming from. But I think what you're dealing with is there's a large segment of society that is reticent to act strictly on your ideas, and sometimes I'm trying to be the devil's advocate here, probably in the truest sense.
Right.
You know, the issues that Canadians have to deal with when it comes to racism. I agree with you about systemic racism, but I don't think the solution is how can I explain this? What about a systemic solution as opposed to, because you need a systemic solution to solve a systemic problem. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. If you pick at the corners of the problem never goes away. My life experience is you really sometimes have to tear something down to make it work better. It's
Can I give you
the challenge you have is difficult, isn't it?
I'm gonna give you an issue, and I want you to use that same approach to see if it's a solution. So, for example, board representation on government, private, and not-for-profit organizations. Board representations in Toronto. It's about 5% visible minority, 95% white. The city is more than 50% multicultural, visible minority, I should say. Racialized. So how are you going to put in systemic solution to that when 95% of so remember, it's only impacting half of the community. So are you going to put in a solution for something that's working for people already?
No, a systemic solution by my definition has to do with a clearly thought out measures like what you're doing. Please do not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Okay. Because at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the freedom to make decisions that aren't with people looking over your shoulder with a slide rule going, okay, that decision might not work because of this and that. That's all I'm trying to say. When it comes to systemic racism, the world is a racist place. If you go to Africa, Idi Amin wasn't the nicest person in the world. He wasn't a racist, but what is the problem in every world is that for me, the problem in the world is systemic favoritism. And sometimes what happens is, well, I'll give you an example. Sports Center adds another black person on the panel. You see another black face on television. That doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
Because that's just
or more black
solution.
politicians. More black politicians doesn't solve the problem.
Right. Yeah. You have to make room. And sometimes this is where I'm trying to come from, is that sometimes the people over our shoulder, the politically correct people, get in the way of the solution because they're so intent on numbers only rather than a path. And I'm a path person. I'm not a numbers person. Right. I want to know the path to get my black brothers and sisters. I grew up. I understood. I got the taste of racism before I got to meet black people. I didn't have a black kid in my Catholic school until I was in grade 6.
Right.
So that shows the ignorance that I don't think it was because of discrimination. They weren't allowed to go to Catholic school. I think it was more or less there weren't that many to go around, if you follow what I'm saying.
Right.
So
I hear what you're saying, and I understand where you're coming from.
So what's the path? The path to can you give me a path? Like, is it just appoint people in each position and say, okay, we got to have one of those there and one of those there? Because if your idea works, then you agree with the Prime Minister when he stood in public and had a bunch of people behind him. He says, this is what Canada looks like. If you're in Western Canada, that's not what you think Canada looks like. So how do you deal with the rest of the country?
Right.
It's you know why I'm talking to you like this, because this is what people say to me. I'm throwing at you. I want people to be treated equally, but my ear to the ground says there are a lot of people in Canada who really don't like some of the ways we do things here in that terrible East. If you follow what I'm saying.
I hear what you're saying. It's even in the black community. So, there's frustration in regards to, the way in which we look for ways to find solutions. So, you always hear people say, oh my God, not another research report. No, we know what the problem is. Oh my
That's
God,
terrible.
you're going to collect more statistics. We know what the issue is. Let's get on with it. And then you get all these people, and there's almost like an economy around the solution, and people almost want to be continue to build that economy around solution development when we know, going back to your point, you put kids into programs, you give them opportunities, they're going to end up pretty good.
Absolutely.
If a kid gets 8 hours of sleep and eats a decent meal 3 times a day, they're going to end up, in a much better place than some kids end up. It's about investing in kids. So, there is a back to basic, component to what you're suggesting. It's just common sense in many, many cases, right? But here's the problem. The Toronto District School Board didn't collect data. So no one knew that the problem existed. When we collected the data, we found out that more than 40% of Black boys in the system weren't graduating. So how could you fix something when no one even sees that it's broken? So for example, imagine you had a clock that was broken, but every time you walked into the room twice a day, it told the right time. Because, you came in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then you came at 2 o'clock in the morning. It looked good to you. That's like what the TDSB was doing. But by collecting the data, there was no more argument. The system was broken. So I'm in the business of having systems acknowledge that there's a problem, organizations saying we have a problem, government saying we have a problem, not-for-profits admitting they have a problem, and then having that conversation and actually putting in place a strategy. And where your common sense comes in, where the very basics come in, where just the let's get on with it attitude comes in, I think is with that strategy. But not many people will admit that, the system's broken.
But they have to be made to, remember we talked about giving people the message they need to hear. At the end of the day, what you're talking about, and I'll use my word, awareness. People need to be aware of what's going on. Right. Your job as a politician is to help us to understand what's going on in our community. And right. If there's a problem in our community, it is my hope, and we only have a minute left, so I've said enough. At the end of the day, like I said, the process, I give you the last word, however you want to use the last time we had.
Well, you know what? I said to your producer, Eduardo, that, what are we going to talk about for an hour? I said, an hour's too long, but I felt like I could have talked to you for 2 or 3 hours.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment. I'll take that as a compliment
because you're honest, and I enjoyed the conversation. It was very candid, and you got to the point, and I appreciate that.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I respect the work that you do. I wish you Godspeed to get all the solutions that you need to get. And it is my hope that you can be a part of what turns our problems less because of love and not anger and resentment. Those 2 things I disavow more than anything. We need to have a little more understanding. And I appreciate you taking what I've said in context. I truly appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I wish you all the best.
Well, I wish the best for me too, but I wish the best. I'm retired now, so what I'd like to see is I like to see the world be a better place. It's the whole reason why we do this program.
Thank you.
He is the Honorable MP Michael Coteau for the riding of Don Valley East. I'm Frank Stanisci, otherwise known as Candid. Thank you for watching Open Forum, seen live Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For Open Forum, other news, entertainment, and sports programming we offer, please check Spanglish Sports World or spanglishworld.ca. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thank you for watching. I'm Candid Frank. He is MP Michael Coteau. Thank you for your patience, sir.